So what's the story behind your comedy work, and do you think it helps you be a better security communicator?
The comedy stuff started very much accidentally, sort of on a dare to do an open mic. And I did it, and I completely bombed. It was horrible. I sucked. But the brain starts going, hey, how could I have done that better?
Yeah.
Right? What could I have tweaked there for a laugh? So it was a slight chuckle at this thing. What can I do to get a louder reaction, a more exaggerated laughter there? That's problem solving. That's engineering of comedy, right? The way I think about it is, what do we have to tweak to get the optimal results here? I've always kind of thought about ways of connecting the different things I do. Comedy and security. I've been reading The Onion for a long time, sort of satire publications. Always loved those. If there's an industry that we need to make fun of, it's security. So that's where Brute Force Attack was born. That was a good name. I ran with that. And we've got a couple of headlines now. Tons of headlines out there. Primarily exists on LinkedIn, because I think that's the audience for it. But it's just meant to kind of poke fun at the security industry, and that's what it exists. It's The Onion for security. I think the browser is kind of a neglected area for security, right? In a lot of ways, we don't think we realize it's very critical for all of our work to happen. And if we're being honest, I keep going back to this idea of it as being the gateway to everything else in our infrastructure, and everything we're doing with this decentralized infrastructure. But for some reason, it doesn't seem. We know that there are threats on the internet. We just don't think the browser is the problem. The last thing I'll say is that there's a lot of organizations you can join, right? Whether you're, there's Blacks in Tech, Women's in Cybersecurity. There's all these organizations that are popping up now. AccessCyber, AccessCyber. There's all these different things you can become part of and join. And these organizations are doing tremendous work to help people who are traditionally underrepresented in this space to enter this space. So really align yourself with something.
What if we could make cybersecurity careers accessible to everyone, regardless of their background? Today, I'm joined by Gautam Sharma, Executive Director of Cybersecurity Education and Training at AccessCyber, a platform that creates pathways for career switchers and underrepresented groups to enter the field. Welcome, Gotham.
Thanks, John. Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Great. Let's talk a little bit about your career journey and background. You've always been a security leader practitioner. What was the inspiration for founding AccessCyber, which focuses on workforce development?
Yeah, so excellent. That's a great place to start. AccessCyber was born of, they always say, solve the problem you're having, right? And so one of the problems, we'll introduce Knox here. Hello, Knox. This is Knox saying hello.
And
Solve the problem that you're facing, right? So my issue was there were all these resources to learn security and to get your foot sort of in the door, but no one really knew what to do with that information, right? Thousands of resources out there. You want a free cybersecurity course on anything, you'll find it. You want labs, you'll find them. But how do you use all of that in any sort of meaningful way? There was no real guide or blueprint to that. And so what AccessCyber is today, it's a couple of things. One, it's a sort of an aggregated website and a resource for all those kind of vetted organizations and tools and software and platforms you can use to kind of build your career and launch kind of what your path is and what you want to do in security. But it's also sort of research focused, right? We're kind of studying the industry constantly, figuring out what the trends in the job market are, the labor force, specifically in the space of cybersecurity looks like, and trying to see how we can guide people accordingly.
Sure. And yeah, I think there's a difference between I think there's a couple of different problems here, right? With respect to education. You have, we don't really have any kind of apprenticeship programs in cyber. We do have some companies like JP Morgan Chase has internship programs, and they have a college development program, which is really somewhat formal. But generally speaking, I feel like we don't really have any kind of education that's in like elementary schools, middle schools, high schools. And then folks decide that, hey, they want to be in cyber. And so they go and they somehow get into a cybersecurity program in a college. Or if they're on a not traditional track, maybe they're, going to, like you said, just learning stuff on YouTube or wherever they can find it. But I tend to see that the education programs, or at least the people that I've hired they might have some skills in some like open source products that they can get their hands on because, that's generally accessible to people in the, um, anywhere.
Sure.
But we don't really see those programs generally being used in enterprises. So there's kind of like there's this big gap between enterprise software and how we deploy things for a big bank or a regulated industry, in that, as a Fortune 500,
Right.
as compared to what tools and systems are accessible to people that are trying to learn it.
Mhm.
Do you help with that kind of gap, or
Yeah,
do- or,
I
or, is
I
it,
touch on that.
or is it really important that, some of the concepts and skills that you get from those open source software is relevant to enterprise? It's just there's a little bit of a leap to learn how to use them, or
So two parts to that, right? First is that a lot of these tools are, if you understand foundationally what they're doing, it's
Mhm.
going to set you up to use those enterprise tools, right? Even some of the open source stuff even is inaccessible unless you have some sort of technical background, right? Or if you're willing to learn that. None of it's very difficult, but you have to kind of put in the time and sort of the effort to learn how that stuff works. So I think we're fortunate that even though nothing's a one-to-one match, there are enough similarities in tools. I just came across someone who'd written a script to say you could replace Splunk with my script on GitHub. And so obviously that's a big claim, and that
yeah,
if true could save millions and millions of dollars for many organizations. But just being able to play with a free sim tool, for example, is a great way to kind of build the foundation to learning, say Splunk, right? And organizations like Splunk have a ton of free resources to kind of share, hey, here are certs, how can you kind of learn the basics of using these tools, and what does it look like? What is this deployed for? What kind of environments? So understanding the context of the tool is also important, right? Beyond just,
sure.
oh, this is Splunk, it's a sim tool. Okay, what does that mean?
Right. Yeah. I mean, like, you're saying it, I'm thinking about like Security Onion, and
Sure,
I'm
exactly.
thinking about, was
Mhm,
WAZUH, how you sound? I'm not
mhm.
sure. We'll get them to edit this part.
Sure.
Wazoo, um, is also, has Elasticsearch, has a lot of the same kind of concepts that you might have in, enterprise sims as well.
Correct.
But Security Onion, would let you look at, any number of different aspects of network
Mhm.
defense, right? And seeing what's on
Oh,
the
yeah.
network, right? And that kind of thing. So, yeah,
Very
yeah. I
glad you
mean,
mentioned Security Onion. Super glad you mentioned Security Onion because I, I'm such a big believer in projects are the way to differentiate yourself. What did you build, right? First entry question. What are you building, right? Can you tell me about, okay, you've got the Security Plus. Okay, that brings you to zero, right? But what are you doing now to actually stand out and for an employer to say, hey, this is the person I want to hire, right? And projects are the quickest way to do that without having real world experience under your belt.
you mean participating in projects, or are you
Building
saying using
projects.
a project? Okay, building
And
projects.
building something, right? So I mentioned that because of Security Onion, right? So
Yeah.
a lot of our students now are building Security Onion on a Raspberry Pi. So now you're learning the hardware piece of it. You're learning the networking connections. You're basically simulating a SOC and with real traffic in your own network.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that definitely on the security engineering track,
Mhm.
building security onion and Raspberry Pis
Sure.
would be, very useful because, I mean, even though you still have packages and everything else, it's the nuances of troubleshooting the build problems and everything else
Yeah.
that kind of gets you thinking about how it works, and then looking at, does it actually work? And you're
Mhm.
seeing the content. Now, maybe you don't understand what the context is from an engineering perspective. Like, an analyst wants the product to work so that we can pull the information so that we can do our analysis. But engineers, they'll get it working. They may not need to know exactly like how these pieces and parts all fit together, but they need to know that the data is there, right? and
100%.
and
Yeah.
so, I mean, like you said, I mean, I'd love to see Security Onion on a Raspberry Pi, um, just because it would just make everything so much more accessible to people at home. And yeah, so it's a great, like you said, it's a great way to kind of get involved in security engineering. If you want to understand like how it works and what these things mean, then you have Security Onion in front of you so that you can do network analysis and
Mhm.
see what's going on, and PCAP forensics and those kinds of things. So lots of good tools. So is that how
Yeah.
you're?
I'll add to that even for a second, John, cut you off. You can build attack machines to now test out, right? If you want to simulate that data, it's not just a blue team exercise anymore, right? So now you can set up attack machines to see what that looks like on the defender side.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And I think that's a good part. That's a good point. And I think it's, you've got to have something on, if you're going to continue the learning path, right? If you're going to continue the learning path, you got to, you're going to have to eventually attack your system to see if your systems are set up so that you can detect that. And I think that's another really good, um, learning path, right, is to understand how attackers do things. One of the great things about like using Kali Linux to do attacks on some infrastructure that you set up at your house is that, as an example, is that you get to see that attacks don't always work right out of the box. Which
Yes.
is that somewhat of a fallacy about attackers only have to be right once. We have to be right a million
Mhm.
times on the defender side. But the truth is that there's a lot of attack uh, iterations so that you can progress your attack to the next step. Things don't just kind of like work right out of the box. Even if you have a system that is vulnerable because you
Mhm.
built it to be vulnerable, or you're using one of the images that have known vulnerabilities,
Mhm.
it's still, the execution of an attack does take some skill.
And what that does is it helps you figure out, where do I want to be in this holistic kind of space of security? Where is the right fit for me? And part of and coming back to looking at all these projects and things is, as you build these, if the frustration is so high, they're like, I'm going to give up. Maybe it's not the space for you. And that serves its own purpose, right? If you're building these things, you don't want the troubleshooting, you don't care for all this stuff. Like, I don't want to look this up. And so what it's done is, it's kind of, you can count your losses there and say, okay, I invested a little bit of time and energy studying this, but wasn't for me. When you think about becoming a lawyer, you think you're going to be in court arguing cases every day, right? That's not what most lawyers are doing. Okay, so there's this vision of what we think a career looks like, and then you're actually day to day on the job is.
Yeah, I think that's a good point too. I mean, it's a cheap bar of entry,
Mhm.
right? To go and grab these tools off the internet and get them set up. And even you could probably set them up in a free tier on Google or
Yeah,
Amazon, right? So you don't have to
definitely.
even buy equipment. But you're right. If you're not interested in figuring out how to make this thing work, you just want it to work, then you're
Mhm.
probably not a security engineer.
Correct. Correct. Correct.
If you like to do that, but when you get into the analysis side, you're like, you know what, this is really boring. That's probably not
Mhm.
you. But
Right.
then you can
Right.
try the attack side, and then you can say, okay, this is where I want. Maybe that's what
Mhm.
floats your boat, and
Oh, yeah.
and and maybe those are all very good, but maybe you're more like a lawyer and you want to do research, understand like policies and practices and stuff, and can't really test that out too much,
Mhm.
on the internet.
Right.
But maybe it is the non-technical parts of the uh, research parts from like GRC perspective and regulatory perspectives that might be more interesting to you.
Totally. We've got all these frameworks you can kind of map against, right? See if you've hardened systems accordingly, and you can check those things off. Again, we always say compliance isn't security, but it's a good way to kind of, it's still a great baseline to figure out what that looks like. And if that's
Yeah.
your wheelhouse, that's your wheelhouse. GRC is always in high demand.
Yeah, and I like your advice too of getting involved with projects and doing work and showing that like that that work that you are you know participating in, right? Maybe you're not a committer, you're not able to do those, you're not doing pull requests and do things. But if you could come up with like ideas of like, here's something that I did, look, this is what I built, this is what I learned from it. I think those are good things to take into interviews. That is going to
Mhm.
definitely set you ahead um, of people for sure. I think from hiring people in my past, but I see how this is helping prepare digital defenders, um, and how Access Cyber is trying to fill that workforce development kind of
Mhm.
gap that we have. Could you share a success story with us of someone who went through your coaching? And
Absolutely. Coaching is sort of a very generous term, right? I want to be very mindful of that also. What we're doing really is providing these blueprints, right? If someone needs help, happy to kind of jump in there and discuss and have those one-on-ones. But really, we're kind of pointing people in the right direction, right? So it's sort of a very loose facilitation. I want to be very, fair about the what our role in people's success is always number one. That being said, there is always times where someone will say, "Hey, found this on your site, really helped me. Thank you for sharing." Right? And those are obviously very useful to hear that, and it kind of, it reminds you why the work happens, and that we're doing it for a reason. So, on that note, there's one who worked at a hospital. She was I don't remember what her title was. She was working something. It was a job she had just pay the bills. It wasn't something that she was passionate about. Always became sort of the de facto like tech person on her job accidentally. Right? People are like, oh, we can ask her. She knows. Oh, computer problem, printer issue. We'll go to her. She knows. Realized through doing that was a lot more exciting than her day job. So she basically sat around waiting for tech to break so someone would look for her. And so that to her signaled, okay, I should probably look into these careers. Over time, what happened is, she tech problems, security related issues. Someone had an issue. I think my computer has a virus. They were constantly reaching out for her, finding her. We started with her floor, her department, and that spread out very quickly. Eventually, she realized she was probably the wrong career. And so, fortunately, she had sort of the internal buy-in from leadership, and people noticed and say, "Hey, you should probably talk to our tech team. You should probably talk to our security team." And she entertained those conversations. And what happened is internships, sort of a fellowship model. They didn't really have a formal process for that, but they built that seeing that someone was interested, and it was obviously an easier process. Someone being on the inside. It's fast forward today. She's very much. This is years ago. She's very much on her track to kind of be a CISO. Worked a various variety of engineering roles, GRC roles, and really got to build this sort of accidental rotational program at the hospital for herself in tech. And so now doing very well in the space. Her interest role is blue team, more engineering side. So that's where she is today. And we'll see where she goes.
that's awesome. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's a great story. I think like people need to find their passion, and I always hope that people's passions, lead to money. I think there's a lot of reason why we're seeing so many. There's a lot of press that says that there are a lot of cybersecurity jobs that are open,
Mm.
and we have these professional cybersecurity uh, degree programs today that we didn't have 20 years ago.
I
But
would like to say on that, by the way. We'll get
you
to
do.
that, but I will let you finish your thought for a second.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that there's two problems with it, and going back to, hey, follow your passion. Someone seeing that they're in a career path and this is not where they wanted to be, but then they pivoted to cyber. I think that's a great non-traditional way. But what as a CISO, what I'm worried about and is that what I'm seeing is that we have a lot of students that are going through degree programs in cybersecurity, and it's almost like they were tempted to go down this path because they saw dollar signs. And when they get into it, I think that their perception of what the work was going to be and what the
Mhm.
work is are completely different. And they aren't bringing the passion.
Mhm.
And in a lot of times I see it and I feel like they've just made a poor career choice, and so, I mean, are you seeing that too? Or
So
you say you had a
yes,
lot to
yes.
say about it. Is this what you have a lot to say about?
Yes, for sure. I mean, when the word college comes up, I'll talk to you for days. There's a couple things there. So the first thing is that, demand fluctuates, right? It's what are the stats right now? Computer science grads have the highest unemployment rate right now in history. I think about things like that, and so the issue with that becomes you go to school, you're spending 4 years trying to learn this stuff. Um, you're taking a lot of other stuff, and the issue with so let me backtrack. We'll edit this out, I'm sure. Let me backtrack a little bit. The idea of cybersecurity and hacking ethos and culture is completely antithetical to academia. Because what is academia? Academia is about rules. Academia is about structure. Academia is about this is how we do things here. And security is I wonder what happens if I press this button. Right? Those are not ideologies that can kind of jive. right? Schools have done it. Don't get me wrong. A lot of schools have security programs. They've launched them and they've had success, but we have to let people break things. And academia is very much about don't touch that, right? Despite openness to research and all these things, there is sort of a concern there. And so that's the first thing. A second thing is by the time it takes academia to keep up with what's happening in industry, and again, there's always exceptions to this. This isn't a blanket statement. There's exceptions to universities that are doing a fantastic job, but across the board, though, typically by the time academia keeps up or catches up to what's happening in industry, the students are already behind. By the time you graduate, you're entering the workforce that's very different from the one you went to school for. Right. So those are my major two gripes, without hijacking the podcast of being what comes across as anti-college. I don't want to have that label necessarily.
No, I mean, but again, I think that this is part of the reason why we need more training and such, right? Because I really feel like most of the cyber, and again, this is my observations. I'm not anti-college. I'm not anti, hey, go get a cyber degree, right? That's not what I'm saying, but it seems like they come, the folks that are in these programs, and maybe I need to find the people in the right programs, and there's always someone in that program that is right.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
But but what I'm saying is that my observations have been that they don't have any technical skills, right? They're coming out of, they have a lot of book smarts, or what they believe are book smarts, but they're not really, practical. And it kind of goes back to the, idea that we don't really have that kind of apprenticeship kind of thing. I mean, even when I was doing my computer information science degree, and we were doing programs in Java and whatever we were doing, right? Whatever I was having to do, it wasn't, they weren't real world examples, and I don't know if any of what I did in college actually helped me from a computer information science kind of perspective. It's a little different than computer science, it's a little less hard, but I don't know if it helped me, right? I don't know if I mean, I compile code, but I'm not sure that when I wrote out, when I write applications today, I don't know. I don't know if it helped me too much. And I worry that in college, we're sending kids to cybersecurity programs and then we're not letting them break things, right? We're not, like you said, it's an antithesis to the culture. And I've been trying to figure out why this is. All I know is that, I'm hiring people that don't have the technical skills, that don't understand why we do what we do. They don't know how to do a proper analysis, right? Which I would expect that you go through cybersecurity, critical thinking skills, and those.
You would hope, yeah.
You would hope that they would know how to do analysis, or they would know how to engineer something. And I really do feel like I've had better success, with folks that came through, IT-based internship programs and CDPs that were from IT, where they were actually building things. I had better success turning those people into cyber people than most of the cyber people that are coming into it. So it's almost like they're not doing anything technical, but you kind of have to get, and I think that part of the preparation of getting people ready for cyber programs is getting them prepared technically. How do these things work? And, anyway.
But no, I'm happy to stay on this for a minute more if you want. The tragedy, part of the tragedy is that cybersecurity, information security, whatever you want to call it, presents this beautiful opportunity to be a truly, colleges like saying this word interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, right? No one knows what it means. It's never applied. But cybersecurity presents a genuine opportunity to become an interdisciplinary program, right? You can pull from economics, effective cybercrime. You can pull from journalism and mathematics, cryptography. There's all these different things that contribute to this space. And I think very few institutions are doing it correctly in that regard, right? Some places will blend that very nicely out. Can't think of any names off the top of my head, but there are places I know that do a great job. Western Governors University, for example, does a fantastic job with their curriculum and the way the program is built. No affiliation, just I've seen their curriculum and I've looked at it for a long time. They're constantly on top of things. Their instructors are practitioners, which is another problem, right? They're, well, let's say this way, security practitioners have very little incentive to go become professors and abandon their day jobs as security leaders and directors and VPs and CISOs to go now teach. Right. There's not a lot of incentive there. Maybe now there might be, right, with market demands changing. That's a different story. But for the mayor's office here a couple of years ago, we built out a program called the Tech and Residence Corps. Tech and Residence Corps was the city program with City of New York. The idea was we would train technical practitioners in pedagogy skills and have them go into universities and teach a course. Those courses have the highest approval ratings that schools had seen in a long time. So there is something about, and not to say professors aren't, good at, I have a lot of respect for that career. I have a lot of respect for professors in general, and people who dedicate their lives to teaching, but you can't be that disconnected from industry, right? There are people who are going to spend the time and upskill themselves and look at it more than just a job, but but there's really there's that disconnect. These aren't people a lot of times who spend time in industry. And again, there are exceptions to all of this. Everything I'm saying has caveats, but typically the path to becoming a professor is someone who's dedicated their life to academia.
Right. Yeah. Like you said, there's kind of some disconnects, right? It's the structured versus unstructured nature of academia versus hacking. There's the practitioner versus professor, kind of like what's driving them. And it's the connectedness between the industry and the universities. Are those lined up, or is it lagging? And maybe it's lined up, but it's lagging, right?
Sure.
And I think that's where I think where it becomes really important for leaders, security leaders, to understand what resources, what their future workforce is capable of, but also know what the gaps are in that workforce, that, the workforce that's coming up today. And how do we fill those gaps? Right. And I think that where AccessCyber can help companies and individuals is how do they help address those gaps? You got this really smart person that just graduated from college with a cyber degree. They seem to have the right, attitude, but you don't really know. And I think part of it is that, I mean, like I was just telling someone the other day, I remember hiring SOC analysts and they were upset that they had to work into the evening because there was an incident. And it's like, you signed up to be a fireman and now
that's the job, governor. Yeah. Right.
That's the job. Right. And, and it's like, did someone tell you that being a SOC analyst didn't mean that you were just work 9 to 5? I mean, that's not the job. Right. And so I think there's some expectation setting. There's some gaps on it that we're, that we need to be cognizant of so that we can make sure that they're being filled during the hiring process, knowing how to vet that candidate for the job. Are they doing things? Are they putting themselves out there? Are they involved in the community? Do they understand, the technical aspects of it, right? But also the non-technical aspects of it as well, right? And how do they keep themselves refreshed and rejuvenated and all that kind of stuff? And if they're not hungry for it, if it's a job and you're only going to read the training manual because someone forced you to do it by this date, that's, maybe it's the wrong career path. I don't know.
This is, I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn, right? I spend more time than I should on LinkedIn. This is a topic that comes up a lot, right? Do you need to be passionate about your job, right? Or is it okay if it's just a thing you do to earn a living, right? And this is LinkedIn, from the very kind of posts and stuff. It's, passion shouldn't be a requirement for your job and you shouldn't have to be passionate about it. If you're doing it to earn a living, that's fine. People go back and forth from that. And it's tricky, but you have to kind of give a little bit of a shit about the work you do. I don't know if we're cursing on this podcast, but I'm sure the editors will think you have to kind of have some involvement and care about the work you're doing on some level. But I don't care what that field is.
Well, I mean, I'm definitely when my older son was deciding what he was going to do for college. I mean, I did have a conversation with him about this. And the conversation was, really had to do with find what you're passionate about, find that piece of work, and hopefully whatever you're passionate about also allows you to make a living, right? That's good. Um, but if you're not going to be passionate about something, find something that makes you a lot of money, and you can be passionate about your weekends and your vacations and everything else. And but it's like, but don't
Yes, right.
do something that's both you don't have any passion for and also doesn't make any money, right?
Correct. Correct.
That's like the
Yeah.
wrong combination of things to do. But it's still, as a hiring person, right? As a hiring manager, I still find it, I still find it like, I know that when I'm hiring, I'm looking for those external indicators you that you care about this more than it's just a job. And
Correct.
I do look for what you're doing on your weekends and how you spend your off time and those kinds of things. I do look for those kind of clues to say, "Oh, this person has passion. I'm not gonna have to send them to every SANS class that there is so that I can get them to do it because they're motivated to go to Las Vegas to do a class and, and whatever, and they get the certification and now whatever." But it's that is where I think that I'm looking for that passion, and I'm looking for indicators of that passion, um, so that, it's not me pulling teeth every time I need to get something to get done, right?
I like
So
this term we just coined right now, IOP, indicator of passion. I
yeah.
like that. Not IOCs or IOAs, IOP. That's good. I like that. But yeah, let me ask you a question, John, if I may. Do you think that we as a security industry are more obsessed with this idea of passion by your work than other spaces?
Um, I I I don't know. I mean, yeah, when I first started thinking about this particular problem, it really had to do it was I started seeing this problem in IT in the early 2000s,
Mhm.
where I was running into people that were, uh, I was working with the military, and I saw people that had aptitudes towards IT or those kind of things because they have like the, tests that they take to say,
Mhm.
This is where you should go."
Sure. Sure.
And, um, And what I started seeing was that I would see people that were in IT, they were in IT, um, job roles in the military, but they didn't care at all about IT at all. I mean, it
Yeah.
was just
Yeah.
it's like they hated their lives, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
I know it's
Yeah.
like totally weirded me out, and that people were in it because I do IT because I love IT. I've always loved IT. I mean, I've been playing with computers since like 1982. So
Sure.
I still play with them every day. And
You got me beat by a couple of years.
yes, I'm
Yeah.
sure. But you which but I think but that's what it is that it's not just in cyber. I think it's in other like technical industries. I think that's true, but I mean, I don't know how nurses stay in nursing if they're not passionate about caring for people. I don't know how teachers stay
Sure.
in teaching if they're not passionate about education. Um, because those are I mean, or lawyers who aren't, doing, if they don't like research, how do they keep
Mhm.
doing it for decades?
Right.
So I
Great.
think that there's some amount of passion that's involved, but I also, I also think my point of view about this is really warped because of just my personal challenges with ADHD, and the technology and the constant feedback loops and stuff help me with like how I
Sure.
interact with systems. And I don't know if non-ADHD people have that problem. Maybe they can get through a job without any passion and just do it for decades.
Yeah.
But that's not I don't know. That's not part of my reality. So I
That's
don't
fair.
know.
Yeah. That's fair. Yeah. It just comes up so often. So I thought I'd get your 2 cents on it. Yeah. That's helpful.
Yeah. So, and well, let's talk about you. I thought you were going to bring a joke there for a second. So, what's the
Yeah.
story behind your comedy work, and do you think it helps you be a better security communicator?
The comedy stuff started very much accidentally, sort of on a dare to do an open mic. and I did it, and I completely bombed. It was horrible. I sucked. But the brain starts going, hey, how could I have done that better?
Yep.
Okay, what could I have tweaked there for a laugh? So it was a slight chuckle at this thing. What can I do to get a louder reaction, a more exaggerated laughter there? So that's problem solving. That's engineering of comedy, right? The way I think about it is, what do we have to tweak to get the optimal results here? They come and then I've always kind of thought about ways of connecting the different things I do. Comedy and security. I've read The Onion for a long time, sort of satire publications, always loved those. And I said, if there's an industry that we need to make fun of, it's security. So that's where Brute Force Attack was born. That was a good name. I ran with that. And we've got a couple of headlines now, tons of headlines out there, primarily exists on LinkedIn, because I think that's the audience for. But it's just meant to kind of poke fun at the security industry, and just that's what exists. It's The Onion for security.
That's awesome. I love it.
No.
I think that we do take ourselves way too seriously,
Yeah.
and it's and I think, I don't know where it comes from, but yeah,
when you borrow terms from military, right, as liberally as we do, when you borrow terms from every industry as liberally as we do, industries that are, I'm not to say more important, but that are, I don't know, military, healthcare, we're borrowing these terms pretty liberally, and so you eventually start thinking of yourselves more serious than you are, right? Not to say that we're not critical infrastructure and everything's not connected, and a cyber attack could cause real world damage and physical, and we've seen that. But there is a sense that when we borrow that liberally from these industries, that we think of ourselves a little differently.
Yeah, I always think of it spy versus spy,
Sure.
and also with military contact. These are just, but I think it has a lot to do with how I got into cyber, just getting through a military lens. I was an IT guy, started working with the military, everything else, all of a sudden everything started talking about security, and now somehow I became a cybersecurity person and all that, right?
Were you in the military?
No, I wasn't. I was a contractor to the military,
Mhm.
and so yeah, so I was just building IT systems, and that's what I thought I was doing. Then they said I had to secure it, and so then then that's why I got into security, because I had to secure systems that I was building, and then it lit something in me to
Mhm.
kind of continue. Um,
I love that.
yeah,
Interject there for a second. We talk about traditional paths and non-traditional paths. I haven't met anyone with a traditional path. I don't even know what that means anymore.
right. You mean I
Uh,
went to high school, college, I went into cybersecurity, then
exactly.
yeah,
Right. If I was going to law school or med school or something like that, right? There's sort of and even there's tons of variety, but there's sort of a structure there. I meet people in tech and security. There is no, people say, I don't have a traditional background. I was like, let me stop you there. What does the traditional background look like to you? Right. Oh, like, who do you know has done that in this space? Right. There's people who are ex-military, they're veterans. There are people who've dropped out of high school, dropped out of college. There's people who did that, right? They've gotten their PhDs, they've done all kinds of things, but there is no, this is what it takes to get here. And that's kind of doing us some favors, because we're still sort of, um, I don't like this word a lot, but we're still in some regard a meritocracy in that space, right? Because if I'm interviewing somebody, the last thing I care about is, where'd you go to school? Truly, right? Where did you go to school? Does
truly,
that matter?
truly, some of the best cyber people that I know do not have college degrees.
Absolutely. And part of that's my own bias, right? But part of that is just, we have to kind of check our biases a little bit. I'm where you went to school doesn't affect what you're gonna be able to do here, right? Or not
I
do.
agree. Well, and it changes
Um,
so fast. Like you were saying, I mean, whatever you learned in college, I don't know if that helps you, right? And I mean, when it's all said and done, I mean, the industry just changes so quickly. There's so many, so many permutations and combinations how you can, deploy technology with new technology coming all the time. If you were
correct.
if you were focused on what you did in college, you got lost, right?
Yes.
You were
Yeah.
gone. So if you don't have that passion or capability to keep learning, I think it's a really hard.
Yeah, there's none. I mean, it's a good proxy for compliance, right? Here's a person who can follow something for 40 years in a regimen, a blueprint, a structure, and so they'll be a good employee. If that's what we're gauging for, by all means, right? But most organizations want something a little bit more than that typically. The only plus side of the ridiculous unemployment rate that we're looking at college grads now is that it's forcing people to reconsider this automatic blueprint. You go to school, high school, college, right? It's forcing us to reconsider what is sort of the ROI on a 4-year degree, or a master's, a graduate degree, or PhD. What does the ROI look like in today's day and age? And it's an expensive lesson, unfortunately. But if it's causing us to kind of reconsider what's a taboo and what's um, just the way these things are, right? You're supposed to do this. Why? Who decided that, right?
Yeah.
And if it's forcing us to revisit the rationale behind these things, I think that's an unfortunate lesson, but an important lesson.
Yeah, I think it's the people that are hiring. I mean, like when definitely. So it took me a long time to get my college degree. Like I think I graduated from high school in '89, and then I didn't finish my bachelor's until like 2010. So it took a long time for me to get my bachelor's. But there were so many opportunities that I wasn't able to take advantage of because I didn't have a bachelor's degree. They wouldn't even talk to me because I didn't have a bachelor's. And again, to your point, but that didn't stop me on my career path at all. But eventually, what started slowing me down was not having a master's degree. So to get the master's degree, I had to get the bachelor's degree. So I got the bachelor's degree, then quickly got the master's degree. And then more opportunities were available, but just because I could get through that filter. And I think that that's what it is. It's a filter. I don't know if definitely, I think I learned some stuff in the MBA program that I did, but I think that I don't know if that was that was my limiting factor, but it is what it is. And I think it has to do with who's hiring. And I think, my generation is more likely to hire people that don't have college degrees, at least in cyber, than, if you go down younger people, I'm thinking that they'll probably be less likely to hire people with college degrees or use that as the reason, but they're going to need other things to do to show that they're, capable of doing the work that they're doing. So it's kind of like that, cyber is and IT are kind of these non-traditional kind of paths by themselves, and that the college is trying to, create programs for IT people and cyber people, which is, not, it's good, it's fine. But I think that it's still, I don't know if we're a profession, I don't know. But anyways, let's turn the topic around to, CISO insights and browser security and stuff, right?
Sure.
As a CISO, you know that employees conduct a lot of their work through browsers today. And that's just, just because of how they access email, how they access SaaS products, and IT just kind of, really, I feel like there's no professional IT in most organizations anymore. It's like most of their applications are being deployed through SaaS today, and they're not really managing a lot of IT infrastructure on their own.
Yeah.
So we've kind of had this like blow up of IT being deployed through, everyone, Microsoft, SAP, you name the big company, they're trying to get everyone to kind of move to their SaaS products. We have this kind of disaggregated world today, right? Where we are accessing everything through a browser and SaaS products, cloud, SaaS, and, the capabilities that we would expect to control inside our own little fiefdoms. Those traditional security pieces aren't really there anymore, or they're there. We need them, because we're not completely, out of the woods from a technology perspective. But I imagine that the way that IT's been kind of dispersed has some impact to how you approach security and how you teach it. So
Yes.
how is it that everything's being accessed through a browser, go into a SaaS app in this cloud-based disaggregated world? How does that change security from your perspective and how you teach it?
Perfect. Sure. So let me say two things, two very popular quotes that make the rounds all the time, right? The first one is the cloud is just someone else's computer, right? We've heard that for years. We've been saying that. Second one is in the future, you will own nothing and you will be happy, right? Those quotes are very much intertwined, right? Because the way we mentioned SaaS applications, the way we reach these things, you're no longer paying for a thing, you're paying for access to that thing, right? Whether that's, whether you're streaming something, that's what we're doing. We're not paying access for a thing, paying access to that thing. You see, if you bought the hardware, you own that hardware. These days with privacy policies, the way things are written, I barely own my own computer, right? I own the hardware, I paid for it. It's in my whatever name, whatever, but I don't own anything on it. as this happens, the browser becomes more of a critical part of your attack surface. It becomes a critical part of how we use things. Browser security is a thing we didn't really talk about much a couple years ago. That's sort of the thing that's been surfacing in more recent years. So really, if this becomes the focal point, the bottleneck of your security, what does that mean, right? So we think about what browser security looks like. What are different plugins? What does it mean when we introduce a new extension into our browser, a new plugin into our browser? What's the trade-off for that added functionality, right? Because everything we introduce in our environment increases our attack surface, including security tools, ironically enough. So thinking about what that looks like is a big part of it, right? Thinking about exploring different browsers, for example. Right now we have AI browsers. Okay, cool. But what does that mean? That even when I'm not using AI, I'm using AI? A lot of people say I don't use AI. We still have people, stragglers, are saying I don't use AI, but the tools you're using are using AI. So by definition, you're using AI, right? So we have that idea there. I would say what the primary difference has been the emphasis on the browser itself, right? Thinking about what are we doing to secure this as our sort of gateway to everything we do.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it is that gateway to everything that we do. I mean, it's, I think users spend more than 90% of their time in browsers today.
Sure.
And just kind of, picking up on the, and it's the browser has become more complicated. I mean, just because as more SaaS apps have come online,
Mhm.
the capabilities of the browser have also had to increase. The frameworks and the code and everything that's running on your system in any particular tab,
Sure.
it's almost like its own little operating system on its own.
Yeah.
And when we were in this situation with desktop computers, we started, deciding that we needed antivirus, we needed something to, protect our, protect us from malicious files or malicious code executions. We wanted to protect where we could go with our system. That it was outside of our network. We didn't want to
Right.
really allow or then definitely don't allow people into the network unless you go through a VPN, et cetera. Right? Firewall
Correct.
rules and everything else. And yeah, it just seems like now we have this very complicated piece of software that is able to render everything. I mean, you and I are in a browser session doing a video. We're recording this podcast right now. And it's like amazing what this capability can do, this browser can do. And then what are we really doing to protect it? And we don't have IDSs and IPSs that are inspecting unencrypted traffic so that our security onion implementation that we have at home can see what's going on. And I think it would be a great project for someone to look at. It's like, hey, how do you inspect what's going on when it's all point to point encrypted? And all of a sudden you're thinking, hey, that doesn't really work. I can't really see that there's an attack happening on the wire anymore because it's all HTTPS traffic.
Correct.
And which is good. I like it to be encrypted, but at the same time, from a defender perspective, it's a channel that I can't see both what good uses are and what bad uses are. So starting to get security technology into the browser so that you can inspect what's happening there, I think is something that we really haven't been talking about too much. I think there's definitely some folks thinking about it, but I don't think people are really thinking about the extensions, OAuth scopes, the where code is. I mean, it used to be that we knew that if it wasn't in our data center, it was suspect. And then we knew that this was a okay place because we had a point-to-point connection between this and this provider. Now this is all disaggregated, and I can't just turn off GCP or AWS Azure. I don't know. I don't know what that code is malicious or not malicious or problematic or not problematic. And then, then you have SaaS sprawl and data sprawl that comes around with it. I think it does change how we think about where we're protecting, where our users are, how they're using systems. The next step is how AI is using those systems. And look, let me know, what do you think about that?
So I think the old rules, we'll call them the old rules of security, still kind of apply, right? There are best practices, how you should utilize technology, especially untrusted system, which is every system, right? We used to know the difference between trusted systems, untrusted systems, and we still use those terms. But But really, every system, zero trust is kind of on steroids, right? Nothing is truly a trusted system, and that's not about paranoia. That's just about the way technology is configured, it's structured, um, the way companies are deploying tech these days, and when things were signing off on and saying, "Sure, okay, no problem," too, right? That's just kind of sort of these privacy policies, acceptable use policies being weaponized in that way. That being said, I've used SquareX, right? I know that's not what we're fishing for here, but I've used SquareX in my browser, and we've used it in a lot of places, right? So this idea of segmenting what you're doing, this idea of virtualized browsers is sort of been a little bit game changing in a lot of ways, where things aren't affecting each other, right? Where you're not worried about the risks from one thing affecting something else.
Yeah, I think the defense in depth part of it kind of still applies to the browser, right? Meaning it's like
Absolutely.
you have things that you need to protect outside the browser, but there's things
Mhm.
that you need to protect in the browser. And then
Yeah.
people can start applying those same constructs that we have from uh, defense in depth, and how
Mhm.
we take different kinds of attack vectors, and then how do we defend against it, and be able to move around in how best we protect it. It's a new piece of software that's executing code. What would we do if this was a computer? We
Mhm.
would do X, Y, Z, ABC.
Correct. Correct.
How do we apply that to this computer that's running inside our machine? Just like we would apply it to a virtual machine that was running on
Mhm.
top of a system. You
Right.
still need to protect that system, whether it's a virtual machine that it's an operating system, so you can apply the operating system tech to it.
Yes.
You still need to be thinking about that from a browser perspective and saying, "Hey, how am I going to apply those same kind of principles to
Mhm.
what's happening inside the browser?" Right? And
I
but
agree. I think anytime a new technology comes up, and forget that the old best practices still apply.
exactly. I mean, going back, it's IP running on a Turing machine. It's
Yes.
still
Yes.
compute. It's still
Mhm.
things that we've been working on for decades.
Yeah.
Apply the same principles to what you're doing on your operating system,
Mhm.
on your local computer, on your virtual machines, the next system up. So we did the stuff, do that with the browser, and just figure out like, hey, how do I do that? And I think you're going to be on the right track.
I think that you made a great point, John. That's exactly what it is. And just if we, I think the browser is kind of a neglected area for security, right? In a lot of ways, we don't think we realize it's very critical for all of our work to happen. And if we're being honest, I keep going back to this idea of it as being the gateway to everything else in our infrastructure and everything we're doing with this decentralized infrastructure. But for some reason, it doesn't seem. We know that there are threats on the internet. We just don't think the browser is the problem.
Exactly. I think that, or that it's a place to defend. That is,
Sure, correct.
I think that's the problem, is that if this was a door,
Mhm.
in your castle that was surrounded by a moat, you'd protect the door, right? And
100%.
this is what it is. Now the browser is this door that's allowing anyone kind of through, you know, unencumbered. It's like this
Yeah.
hidden tunnel underneath your moat that goes right into your environment and allows you to move data wherever you want it to move. It's a terrible, not a bad analogy, but but it is as mostly undefended access point, right?
Yes.
Into
Yes.
people's environments. Well, let's keep going. Looking ahead for 2026, what's your prediction for the biggest challenges CISOs will face as that they should be preparing their teams for right now? What kind of
I
challenges do you think
Yeah.
CISOs are going to have in 2026?
Challenges for CISOs. I think going back to this idea that the old stuff doesn't go away, right? If the old threats still exist, there's going to be a lot of pressure to focus on AI, right? When maybe that's not always the right answer, right? Focus on, hey, how are you addressing AI threats? Hey, what are we doing to protect our AI systems? The responsibility with security in general is twofold when it comes to AI. A, it's protecting the AI systems themselves, and B, it's protecting us from what AI can do, right? So uh, I read this great paper, which was kind of the MIT paper came out. We made fun of this on brute force attack, which is why I'm bringing it up. The 80% of ransomware is now AI generated. I don't believe that. Anyone who's worked in security knows that that's not true. But MIT had co-signed that paper, and so it had a lot of weight. Since been retracted. But the idea that we're fighting these crazy claims about AI, which are not true. So fighting misinformation and disinformation is going to be a big challenge for the CISO role going forward, as it's always been, by the way.
I I agree. I think that we just can force anything into any language we want, and I think, and
Absolutely.
of course, if MIT is saying, "Hey, there's hype around AI and AI." 80% of AI texts are being generated or ransom. What was it? What was it? It was
80% of ransomware attacks are now AI generated. And
80% of,
immediately,
yeah.
the security community is going to rip something like that apart, right? Because we know that that's not true. We're going to ask for sort of evidence of
Whatever that means, the attacks are generated. You could just, again, it's just statistics being weaponized, right?
correct, correct.
And it just creates a lot of hype and a lot of FUD.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but I do think that but it's not just a challenge inside cyber, right? It's actually a challenge for everyone. There's so much content that's being weaponized to as clickbait
Mhm.
that we've got to really be putting our critical thinking hats on and, using those critical thinking skills to make sure that, can we see does this make sense? Does it pass the sniff test? Because because we're getting lot of lot of information that's, trying to get us to click.
Absolutely. And so just to reiterate that point on AI, I think there's a lot of pressure for people to now allocate more resources, whether that's capital or headcount, towards AI problems that may not exist. So just kind of that mindfulness of, as a
Yeah,
CISO, as a leader, as a technical leader, you may know these things aren't real, but the external pressure to focus resources there may be challenging, right? And to ignore the threats that we know are tried and true.
absolutely. Um, we've talked a lot about the talent shortage.
Mhm.
What's the biggest misconception about who can succeed in cybersecurity that you're working to break down?
Okay, that's good. I think initially, we talked about some of these things, right? What is the sort of pedigree of a person who would succeed in this field, right? That doesn't exist. Um, that you need to be super passionate about the work. I think, as we touched on, you have to have some interest in the work. You have to care about it a little bit, and it has to excite you on some level beyond. If it's just a paycheck, it's just a paycheck. But there has to be something that keeps you saying, "Let me keep learning what's happening. Let me keep on top of what's happening in the industry." Misconception I like to break down is, what does a security professional look like? Right, the industry's been male dominated for a very long time. I don't think it needs to be that way. Okay, there's a lot of organizations, women in cybersecurity, for example, that do a lot of great work pushing minorities and women into the space and helping them build that through. So I think that's very important. Um, the idea that you have to be a technical genius, you have to know how to code, you have to know all these different things to be efficient in this space. You don't have to. That's not necessarily true. All of those things will make you a better technologist and a better security practitioner, but none of these are meant to be. Well, they're meant to be that way, but they shouldn't be barriers to entry.
Right. Yeah. So if you don't have to be technical enough, right?
Yeah, or what does technical mean, right? People will
Yeah.
ask, or like technical? What is that? How do we define technical? There's levels to this. There's not, is GRC a non-technical role? I don't know. I think a technical person would do better in a GRC role than a non-technical person, and however we're describing that.
Yeah. I mean, I think so. What kind of advice would you have for someone that doesn't feel like they're technical enough to take that first step?
I would say this is where the interest comes. If you're willing to put in the time and kind of work on these projects and not give up and kind of build something and see that, hey, this is where my time and effort went, and this is what came out the other end. I think that's a big part of it. So the idea that if you're willing to learn a thing, you're going to get it, right? If you're willing to put in the time, if it's not interesting to you, that's different. Then pursue something else. But if you're willing to put in the time and the effort, you're going to get it. None of this is rocket science. Even rocket science is a rocket science, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, like you said, I believe that. I don't think there's any part of this that you can't learn, or you need to understand enough about technology, but you don't need to be, you don't need to write an assembly code to do this work,
Sure,
right?
sure,
And you don't even have to write code. I mean, you need to understand probably pseudocode, right? You need to understand like how systems talk to each other and how they work.
sure.
We have a lot of analogies that we borrow from different areas that we apply to security, that if you understand those analogies, which are based on, just human systems, then I think that you can figure out like what's actually happening here, right? And
Mhm.
understand it well enough that you can participate, even if you feel like you're not technical enough, but you can learn it. You can learn it. You can succeed if you put the time in. And I think that's great advice from you.
I agree. And I think the last thing I'll say is that there's a lot of organizations you can join, right? Whether you're, there's Blacks in Tech, Women's in Cybersecurity, there's all these organizations that are popping up now. Rice's Cyber, AccessCyber, there's all these different things you can become part of and join. And these organizations are doing tremendous work to help people who are traditionally underrepresented in this space to enter this space. So really align yourself with something.
Gautam, it was great having you on the show. You and Knox both. See you, Knox.
Let's get a picture of her after this. Yeah.
And thanks so much for being on the show.
John, thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.